Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Divided Films. I'm your host, JJ, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Keith.
Hello!
And coming back to us on the podcast today, our very good friend, Johnny Dellaluna. Welcome back, Johnny.
Hello. Thank you for having me back. This is technically my fourth time on the show, but my third official time.
Third time. Yeah, that's fine. No worries. That's a long story for another day. But
thank you guys again for having me.
Yeah, of course. Happy to have you, Johnny. Who also has the Winning Ticket podcast as well. So shout out to that podcast, especially since it's football season, and I'm sure you guys have a lot to talk about.
That's right. Yeah, you could find us. I know the fan base is more film centric here, but
there's a Venn
you're
diagram.
A sports fan, an NFL fan. Yeah, right. I know the Colts and the Jets are kicking off soon as we're recording too. So hope those New York Homer Jets fans get another win.
Not me, but that's okay. So today we have actually a double feature. It's kind of like a Divided Films first. So thanks, actually, Johnny. We would have just done one film, but we figured Johnny helped us discover that the sequel to the film we want to discuss is also divided. So two movies that are both divided, and those are the Maleficent movies. So Maleficent in 2014, that is divided, falling into the category of having a negative score from critics and a positive score from audiences. So 54% of critics approved and 70% of audience approved, so that's 16% difference. And the consensus there, Angelina Jolie's magnetic performance outshines Maleficent's dazzling special effects. Unfortunately, the movie around them fails to justify all that impressive effort. So that was the 2014 movie. Kind of, critics didn't really feel like there was, I guess, much of a point to that movie, but it went over audiences. And then 5 years later, in 2019, we get the sequel, Maleficent, Mistress of Evil. And this movie is even more divided than the first one. Critics liked it even less. Audiences liked it even more. 39% of audience approved that one. 95% of audiences liked that one.
Damn.
And the critics...
big.
Yeah, the really big divide there. It's over 50%. And the critics' consensus for Maleficent, Mistress of Evil... While it's far from cursed, Maleficent, Mistress of Evil too rarely supports its impressive cast and visuals with enough magical storytelling to justify its existence. So, you kind of get the sense that the critics didn't really think there was much of a narrative purpose to these films, which is kind of interesting. I mean, for me, I basically get a sense that with the first movie, at least, they're kind of trying to do something similar to Wicked, which is to take an infamously, one-dimensional, just super evil villain, and give them more backstory, more, I guess you could say, dimension to them, show the good side, while also fitting into that original fairy tale framework. However, I was disappointed when I first saw Maleficent years ago in theaters because it actually wound up really deviating from that original 1959 animated movie. Not that it had to be super strict, but it just kind of was like false advertising to me in a way. And the Maleficent character in the live action is actually quite different. It might as well be a whole different character from the animated version, who's one of my favorite Disney villains. So that was kind of my beef with that movie at the time, and I kind of felt the same rewatching. But if we just tackle these movies one at a time, Johnny, if you can just take us through what you had thought of the Maleficent movie when you had first seen it, and just maybe if it matched what your expectations were.
Yeah, for sure. So, you guys, this is my second Disney movie coming on. So you guys know I'm big Disney fans.
Our Disney guy, Disney correspondent over here.
I love it. I did not see Maleficent when it first came out in 2014. So I walked into this viewing, completely fresh. I didn't read any synopsis, didn't know, if this was a story that was going to tie in too much with the Sleeping Beauty story. I only went on just the advertising around it, and to put us back into the time frame this was in, right? This was the real beginning of the Disney live action remakes.
Right.
The one before it was Alice in Wonderland in 2010. And that like checked all the Disney boxes. It was Tim Burton directed, Johnny Depp starring in it. Like, it was all the best stuff at the time that was working for Disney, all in one kind of film. Big, big budget CG effects, colorful characters, and naturally made a boatload of money.
Yes.
So the next project, out of that, there's Cinderella that comes up shortly after there too. I think this is after Maleficent, but that really expanded. Like, okay, what can we do? And I really think they tried to replicate the Alice in Wonderland formula, where they say, let's get a character that has a lot of potential, and let's get a big A-list star. And it's like no bigger A-list than Angelina Jolie, who I also want to say is by and large the best part of both of these films, but especially the very first Maleficent. So going into this movie, I wasn't a huge fan of the Disney remakes. A lot of them just don't have that same magic that the animated films do. And that's for multiple reasons. Animation as a medium just has a lot more potential. It's you can be more creative. You can have some more fun with the characters and the stage business. And a lot of these live action films tend to be very stilted. The cinematography is great, but nothing. There's just no charm to it. Not knocking anyone who does enjoy these types of films, but that's why I stayed away. And when I watched it this time, it was kind of what I was expecting. Like, I don't think it really bucked any expectations in that way. But I did watch, I want to know the backstory of Maleficent. Is she the first character I would want to have a backstory for? Probably not. I just liked how devious she was. She's in Sleeping Beauty probably for all of like a half hour. But her, she makes a big impression. So you do worry if, like, by stretching out her story, if she's going to be, like maybe I'm trying to find the right word. Like, you're just not going to be as interested.
Yeah.
She's not going to be as evil.
I agree.
So,
part of the character's strength, I thought, in the animated version was her limited screen time, because there's like a mystery to that character.
Yeah.
And the fact that if you're, in the animated version, they're so economic with her, with how much screen time she has, that whenever you do see her, it has more impact, because she's very visually intimidating. The voice actress does a really good job of having that like evil, scary voice. She had voiced a few other villains as well.
Yeah, the stepmother, Eleanor Audley is her name.
Yeah. There you go.
And she voiced the stepmother in Cinderella.
That's
so
right.
That's why. I mean, she's got a very good villain voice.
Yeah, she does. She scared everyone she encountered. But she, I agree. Like, the character to take this character and like give her own full length movie, I feel like it's almost inevitable that the character return to someone a totally different. Like, it's almost no relation really by the time they maybe like rework the script over and over again.
Yeah.
Which is like unfortunate, because I have to say Angelina Jolie does a great job, and this version of Maleficent is kind of interesting and it is kind of like alluring in a certain way, but just does not have the same appeal that the animated version has, which is probably the biggest hang-up I have about the movie. But Keith, I remember you saying at one point before we recorded that you did kind of like this movie, so I'll give you a chance to play the devil's advocate appropriately enough.
The Maleficent advocate. This was my first time watching it, both movies. I was not that I'm particularly drawn to them, but it's just like I had other stuff going on, and that's kind of like how I feel. Like, if you have other stuff going on, you might not, especially with the second one. I actually dug Maleficent. I had this I watched it with my morning coffee, and what it does go through a formula that we know, but it tries stuff that is interesting enough that raised some of my eyebrows that I was not expecting. Plus, I also think having art director, it's his first time directing. I thought he added a lot visually, as much as he can.
What I thought with Maleficent, I think when you're under the Disney umbrella, you're not going to get a full bad guy movie. She's going to be an anti-hero at most, and they're going to try to add some likability or some sympathy. And I actually thought they did, especially in the first act. I think we'll get into what happened in the first act that raised my eyebrows, and I'm like, oh, it's trying to say something, and I think that's that's what made the character a little bit interesting for me. Of course, in the second act, there's pacing issues, and you got a as much as you can do type villain. And of course, the third act is kind of video game-ish. But I don't know. There's some interesting things going along, and of course, you're just drawn to it. You're drawn to Angelina Jolie's magnetic performance.
Yeah, I agree that the first act, I was enjoying what they were setting up when I first saw this. I kind of liked how they would explain, what had happened to her to make her evil and jaded, she was betrayed. I thought that all made sense. So I thought, okay, I was following along in the beginning. And then, you get to that scene where they basically recreate the cursing sequence from the animated movie. But then, you get a hint that they're going to go off track just by the fact that they change one line at the end when she's doing the curse. Instead of a sleep like death, instead of saying, she will prick her finger and die, she will prick her finger and fall into a sleep like death, which is way less scary or impactful. So then I had, my fears were coming true, here we go. This is going to be a tamed, watered down version of what this character was from the 50s version, and so forth. But again, that first act, what they were setting up, I kind of liked, especially the one sequence, when, this is probably the Angelina Jolie's best scene in either movie, is when she wakes up and her wings were removed. She has this performance, she has been physically violated in that scene, and you can maybe make a parallel between that and other kinds of experiences other women have had. And so I thought that was a very compelling scene, and I wish maybe the movie kind of, I thought there was a lot of potential in that sort of sequence, but again, as the movie went on, it kind of would lose me more and more, and again, kind of pull back on the intensity level.
I was surprised they had.
I think is a shame.
I was surprised they had a scene like that in this. It is equivalent to a sexual assault, and what the character goes through emotionally, and her she has an arc in this, which I appreciated. I just think that with the Sleeping Beauty story itself, I think if you're a Disney executive and you're like, okay, Alice in Wonderland made $1 billion. Okay, what are we looking at? What can we do? Of course, you're going to focus on Maleficent. Like everyone else, there's not much there with the other characters. Maybe the fairies, and they're only background characters. They're only side characters, and they were fun. They were they were the Three Stooges.
I was about to say they're like the Three Stooges, which is funny because they're the focus in the animated movie, really, and they're the ones kind of driving the plot. And in this new version, it's Maleficent who takes focus, and she's driving the plot. And so those three fairies, they changed their names, they changed their personalities.
They butchered them. Yeah, they absolutely butchered them. The joke I was making was I think one of them was named Knob. I think that was one. Yeah. It's Knob, Wagon, and Whistle or something.
They're all it's like Dumb and Dumber and Dumbest.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of that. I have more to say.
I was confused by what they were trying to do with those characters, because in the beginning they're with Maleficent, and then they're against her. I was like, what is the motivation of these fairy characters? I don't think that was fleshed out, but again, I didn't need, the focus was not going to be on them anyway, so fine. But that was just an eyebrow raise. What are they doing with these characters? I don't even think they know.
No, I think the issue with this movie that is not present in the sequel is that, and by I'm a Disney fan, by no means am I a Sleeping Beauty purist. Well, they didn't get that right. Mm-hmm. Changing the names and the personalities of the fairies is you just didn't have to do that.
It's small potatoes. It's not that big a deal.
Right. But they, the Sleeping Beauty story itself is very, if you had to write out the plot, it would be 4 sentences long. There is not a whole lot that goes on in that movie. The movie itself is a very brisk, it's barely an hour and 15 minutes. And again, with animation, you spend a lot of time with music, a lot of time with they're making the dress and the cake, and it's just a lot of non-scripted, just little business that you can get away with putting minutes and minutes into a film. So when you adapt to live action, right, you now have to make up for all that stuff. Yes. And I don't think this movie had a choice, and it kind of chose both. but at the same rate it shows neither, because it would follow faithfully for some scenes, right? It would obviously started out completely fresh, completely new. I was on board with that. It's an opening that's overdone in like movies for younger audiences, where it's like the whole Once Upon a Time, and then I don't know, like they're always showing them as kids nowadays. Like everyone wants to see who these people are as kids. The whole thing with Stefan was engaging enough, knowing the plot of Sleeping Beauty, and then after that they did follow the story, right? They had that whole scene which was almost word for word, and that was due to Angelina Jolie's fascination, appreciation, her devotion to the original film. And then after that, as the second act rolls along, the third act rolls along. Now I made a joke earlier about like a 3 men and a baby type situation where I thought Maleficent was gonna go through the struggles of parenthood. She does that classic scene where it's like she's like burping the baby and then all of a sudden is peeing on her or something like that. That's where my brain would go. They could have made it a lot funnier. And then again follows similar story beats, but then now you go to the end of the second act, the climax of the film, this big fight with Stefan, who is really the villain out of this whole thing. And we even see that Aurora, who plays a much bigger role in the sequel, she doesn't even regard Stefan as her father really.
But she has one
and
scene with
not
him.
her.
She knows him for 5 minutes.
It's just, it ain't working. So back to my point, it really being that this movie made some cool decisions, stuff I was on board with, but ultimately it was so disjointed with what it wanted to do that I had a hard time really getting into it. And maybe I'm not exactly the audience. I'm a 29-year-old white guy. So, this movie's not made for someone specifically like me, but as a fan of this story and these characters, I think they should have, I don't know, just making more concrete decisions on whether this was a brand new story or a story that did, you're really talking like a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, I think Keith mentioned in an earlier convo, and then having us actually follow the events of the film behind the scenes. If I could watch Sleeping Beauty and think about what was going on behind all of this from Maleficent, I thought that would have been pretty cool, but you can't because they changed things.
Yeah, right. I would have preferred if they just stuck one or the other. Which is it? Is it the same story or is it a totally different story? And they try to have their cake and eat it too. Right. I do think there is a lack of, consistency with that. I mean, also it's a mixed bag because the choices they do make that deviate, some of which I like, some of which I don't like. Mm-hmm. And I mean, again, they make some choices which I respect that at the very least, but it's kind of hit and miss. I feel like. I like at the end that the true love kiss that breaks the curse is actually, a motherly kiss, maternal love, as opposed to the prince that you just met. And that's also kind of fashionable too within the last 10, 15 years is modern kids movies, sort of deconstructing old fairy tale tropes like love at first sight, that kind of thing.
Sure.
So that was
which is great, by the way. Even though it almost is starting to get a little stale because we're expecting it. It still is a progressive good thing, though.
Right, to get away from it. But it's been addressed now in at least a few other films, like Frozen, which came out the same year. Yeah. Enchanted, which came out years before that. It's we get it.
You even have characters like the latest Disney princesses, like Raya and Moana, that don't even have love interests at all.
They don't need no men. They don't need a man.
You just need The Rock, rapping to a Lin-Manuel Miranda song.
Yeah, to get the kids in the seats. But what you said too, maybe this wasn't. We could say this is not a movie made towards older men. I'm in my early 20s when this movie comes out.
But I dug it.
But at the same
I'm an older man. I dug it.
At the same token, I was gonna say, at the same token, I feel like this movie is also trying to appeal to people who grew up with the original version, who are older now, whether they're bringing their kids or going by themselves, what have you. But I think I think Disney as a corporation definitely knows that there are people who are older who still have a love for their characters and for their content, and a movie like this is also trying to bring them in too. It's like you have your child audience, your family audience, but then you also have your I don't know, what do you call it, adult child audience, people who still will go out and see it. So
that's me.
Yeah, that's us basically. We still love our Disney.
I think we have to look at this in the more I had to more time I had to marinate on this movie, I'm trying to look at this under like this Disney umbrella, like this Disney corporate product, and this was in that first early stages of their live action, as Johnny said, their live action remakes.
Yeah.
And I'm not a fan of the Alice in Wonderland, but it was like they took a chance on something very different, and it was more of a stylistic choice is why I didn't care for it. And
that also is a different story.
This was,
in Alice in Wonderland is like it's like a follow-up story to the animated version, and then also that one I think Johnny mentioned focuses on a character that really isn't on screen for most of the original version, being the
It's
Manhattan.
not a shot-for-shot remake.
Similarities.
Is what I'm saying.
No.
And this is,
Right.
we're even confirmed at the end through the older Aurora narration. It's like, now you know how the story is. This is a retelling. And I think they kind of had to, like, I don't think Disney would, if someone went, Maleficent's not going to Vegas. Like, you're not going to, like, it's not going to be that risk. They're going to go the safe route with this movie.
I would love that.
Going to Vegas.
They're going to go.
Maleficent does Vegas.
She's not going to the beach.
Viva Rock Vegas.
She's not going on earnest adventures, is what I'm trying to say.
What? No one said she would.
No, but like, I mean, we can get into it with the sequel. But what I mean is, like, they're playing it so safe that it is a retelling, and the fact that they had to go this way and they took interesting shots is probably why. Like, I expected it to be a retelling. I'm not surprised. And it was.
Right.
Okay.
If anything, this is a good companion, a good double feature. You'd only be done with it in like what, 3 hours? Like,
it's pretty tight. I mean, the like Johnny said too, the animated version is pretty short, and that one you don't even really watch for the story. I would say like a lot of those movies, the Disney movies of the 50s, like the Cinderella movie, you almost watch more for like the beautiful animation, right? Like there's some really beautiful the songs as well are classic. Get those like full choruses, right? Just like no characters are singing, there's just a chorus of people randomly singing. But then like the artwork is so gorgeous, like the backdrops and everything. It's almost like paintings that are moving, and especially in the Sleeping Beauty movie. So that's to me the biggest appeal, in addition to the villain Maleficent.
So they expanded upon it.
So I don't mind.
Expanded upon it. Yeah.
Right. So like, yeah, they expanded upon it. So I don't mind the deviation from the story. I just I really like that version of the character, and I obviously in this new day and age, you're not going to have her screaming that she has all the powers of hell like she did in the 50s version.
Right. I
I wasn't expecting that. But you get a more toned down character. So yeah, I wasn't a fan of that. But of all those live action remakes that we're bringing up here, I would say like this is towards the top of that category. Because especially after this, it was almost like a snowball effect. Like we were getting after this more of these live action remakes more frequently, and it was almost
and more
like
shot for shot.
like
it was just
right more
Yes.
shots, more just like unnecessarily like shot for shot remakes. And they were getting worse and worse, I feel, as they went on. And honestly, most of those are divided as well. The Aladdin remake, the Lion King remake. I mean, we're like, we would side probably with the critics on those who didn't like those live action remakes because it's like obvious cash grabs. But a lot of people enjoyed them, and good for them if they like them. But I'm sure most people would go back to the originals. Because you might as well, at least with this, if you really like this story better, or this version of the character better than Maleficent, at least you can make your choice, like, as opposed to like the Lion King, where there's really nothing, there's no choice to be made really at all.
Before the sun sets on her 16th birthday, she will prick her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel and fall into a sleep like death. A sleep from which she will never awaken.
Maleficent, please don't do this. I'm begging you.
I like you begging. Do it again.
if you're really into Maleficent, you got the original movie, Kingdom Hearts, and now I think this actually, it adds enough to the character while also like you're, of course, JJ, you're gonna get a tone in a Disney movie. You're gonna get a toned down main character villain, especially if they're a villain. I think that happened with Cruella as well. But you're going to get toned down. And I like the framing of the, like, it wasn't that she was evil. She was just angry, like betrayed. It was overcoming an assault. And like, there is love to give there. Like, she's opening herself up to this person. And that's how I don't know. I am the Maleficent advocate on this film. Not much. There are problems with this film.
It is a compelling motivation, but at the same token, the motivation of the original character in the animated movie, I also think is kind of cool, because she's so evil that she curses a baby to death just out of spite because
You
she
would
was
like
insulted.
that.
She was invited to the baptism. I just think that's like, she's so evil that she has like nothing better to do than to just curse this baby because she was invited to the christening. And then it's like the whole movie, she's hell-bent on having this prophecy fulfilled because it's like a matter of pride for her. She's like so evil that she has to have this come true. And so I find that to be so, like, she's so like far down that one-dimensional evil that it actually does work, because it is like so extreme, and she just exudes, she is the mistress of all evil in that version. But then I get a sense that in this franchise, especially what we get in the second movie, which we'll transition to soon, is that she's not really as evil as she was originally made out to be, right? Like, she actually is good, and now we're going to maybe give this character some long overdue justice, because maybe like that original portrayal or perception of the character as just being pure evil was like a smear campaign, basically. And there's actually a lot more to her. So that's kind of like the thesis, maybe, or the way that these movies justify their existence, is by giving her like, a second shot of being good.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, and it has to be, right? Because it's Disney. Like, imagine like a Joker type take on this character that obviously wasn't made by Disney, that really like could expand on maybe that, that allegory of sexual assault, that could really give this character depth and really like have her do truly horrible villainous things. This is obviously some wicked timeline that will never exist. Mm-hmm. But I think with this movie, that might be its biggest sin. Very plainly, if you watch, which I did, I watched these films back to back, Maleficent and Sleeping Beauty. One of them is clearly more scary, more imposing than the other. Even though Angelina Jolie gives a great performance, it's just a different take on the character where, there's for me, there is really no reason to revisit. When Sleeping Beauty exists, there's little reason for me to watch a Maleficent, because the higher points don't out-high the high points of Sleeping Beauty. If anything, there are a little more dull moments, even in a movie as brisk as this one, which was like around 90 minutes.
Yeah,
which,
the first one is
thank
tight.
heavens.
Yeah,
it's tight. The second one's a little longer, which it's actually is not too bad. I know we'll talk, and it's more like an action movie at that point. But
we'll see. We'll see. That's gonna be interesting when we get to that eventually.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think that what was I was gonna say something to the effect of like, like if you are just a fan of that original take on Maleficent, you would be a bit disappointed in this new take. You kind of have to appreciate both separately and not really going into one thinking you're getting the other. I mean, if anything, I appreciate that this movie maybe popularized the Maleficent character and maybe made people more aware of that original Sleeping Beauty movie, because with the exception of like Kingdom Hearts, I feel like Maleficent is a villain that doesn't appear in as much Disney media as, say, like an Ursula or a Scar, or even like some of the other older ones like Cruella and Captain Hook. I feel like she was always like a underrated villain or underappreciated.
They gave her a little bit more of a personality.
Right.
Like, if I'm sure, if you go to Disney World, there's Maleficent, and if you were to like, hey, how you doing, Maleficent? She's like, doing better than you. Like, she had a little bit, like a little.
Right.
But my question to you, and then to the both of you, is, of course, this isn't Wicked, and it's hard not to see the Wicked comparisons when you watch this. But why does like if I'm an Elphaba diehard fan, like to the Wizard of Oz, why? What's the difference between Wicked to Wizard of Oz? Why does that get a pass for you guys? Because you're both musical theater people, and Wicked is a 10 out of 10 for me.
Okay.
But why does that get a pass and not Maleficent to Sleeping Beauty?
I think just because Wicked doesn't change the original framework, I feel like it was like more effort to keep within that original framework of the Wizard of Oz story, whereas I kind of get a sense that they initially wanted to, in Maleficent, keep to the Sleeping Beauty framework, but they just couldn't figure out a way to have that story be the same and still make this character like have a good side to her. So I feel like they almost cheated in a way by changing the story. To me, it's like almost like they made the story up. They made the Maleficent script up as they went along, and that's never a good sign. Whereas Wicked, it's like more clever to see how the story you are familiar with and this new story, how they come into
It's
sync
done better
eventually, and how they do eventually
It's
line
done
up.
better. The pacing, and that's Broadway. People love the book. I'm just like, if I'm watching Wizard of Oz, it's like, oh yeah, the Scarecrow and the Wicked Witch, like they're fuck buddies.
Well, I don't know if I rewatch when I rewatch The Wizard of Oz, if I catch it on TV, sometimes I'll think about it like, oh, okay, maybe this other stuff than Wicked is going on in the background. I don't really think that, actually. I kind
gotcha.
of do see them still as separately. I just think, again, like with Wicked, it's like a clever twist.
I gotcha.
And you know, if you go into it blind, it's like more rewarding just to see them again come up with clever ways to make two stories fit into one.
I think Wicked has so much more to work with, because I think The Wizard of Oz is a much more richer story.
Yes.
Okay, I'll agree with you on that.
You know, was more closely adapted to the L. Frank Baum book as opposed to Sleeping. So Maleficent's an adaptation of the Disney version of Sleeping Beauty, which came from, was it Charles Perrault or something like that?
I'm sure there's tons of versions of
right.
Sleeping Beauty.
So like they had there's so little going on in Sleeping Beauty, even though it's a great film. It still is one of my favorites. I think that with Wicked there's so much more. Obviously too, like, you know, being on stage, you have like much more character work, songs. Like there's Wicked is, I mean, obviously head and shoulders above Maleficent, but that's the reason I think why it works a lot better. It literally has more going for it in almost every possible
no, that's
way.
fair.
Yeah, you're right. There's almost, because the original source material has so much more going on, there's more potential to come up with new ways of working around that. We're here, it's like there's maybe not enough to work with that you have to deviate. It's like inevitable. But again, like you kind of, as an audience member, have to understand that like you have to perceive those two stories as being more separated and not really one and the same like you would with a Wicked.
That wasn't meant
Wizard
as
of
a
Oz type.
gotcha question. That was more just like, no,
Gotcha journalism.
Gotcha podcasting. No, I was just I think you guys both gave very good.
I think it's
you
a
guys
valid
gave both
question,
Very good
Keith.
answers. That it's and I'm also like, I could still be a
passed the
fan
oral
of this
exam.
movie and agree that like there are stuff that I liked about it that I mean, it's far from perfect. It's a not heavily flawed, but I still like, it's a good date movie. Watch with your kids. That's how I feel. And when we do the scoring, I'll talk about that.
Yeah, there's enough going for it that I think people who watch it obviously a lot of people, audiences liked it. There was enough there for them. With probably Angelina Jolie alone is a big selling point that really won a lot
She's a
of people
star.
over. Where I don't know if no other actress probably could do this role. Like, it was inevitable that she would do this performance, but because she's so good, I think that's enough to win over audiences. Whereas, you know, critics, they're way more laser focused on script than the normal viewer would be, and so you know, the narrative flaws weigh heavily more on them than they do audience members. So that would be, you know, like, if we maybe want to go into our scores for Maleficent before moving on to Mistress of Evil. You know, Johnny, what is like, what would you conclude about the Maleficent portion of this conversation, and what would your percentage score be?
Of course. So a lot of the stuff that we said earlier is trying to be an adaptation, but trying to be something new. It's trying to be a vehicle for Angelina Jolie. But then there's like a lot of like Stefan scenes, and it's funny, we've talked about this movie a lot due to circumstances, and none of us have really even brought up like Fanning as Aurora, her performance, Prince Philip's performance. Like it really is a movie that's like it just like it strikes me on paper that this would be a huge success, which it was, but in execution, just like a lot of these remakes, it's still lacking in that extra punch. It's like watching Will Smith do Robin Williams' Genie, where you're like, okay, I get it, but I really just don't feel anything. Like, I could definitely see worse, but I've seen better, and I want better. So, Maleficent falls under that category, and for that reason, it's certainly not a bad film, not at all. It's just not a great film in my opinion. I think 50%, right smack in the middle, is probably where I would seat it.
Yeah, and I think I'll wind up falling closer to your score. But Keith, I have a feeling that you're going to be on the other side of that Rotten Tomato barrier there.
Most movies that come out in a year, if you really kind of look at a list of movies, like few are very great, timeless, and then they go really good, fine. Most of the movies that come out in a year end up being fine, like all right. Enjoy. If I enjoyed it, it's fine. This movie is, I think, and most movies, how I grade fine movies are in the 60s. I don't really need to watch them again, but they're all right in my book. But I think what this movie does in the first act and her journey, of course, Angelina Jolie's acting, everyone's acting was fine, but she's a powerhouse, and falters a little bit in the second act, but it's enough to keep me engaged, and it does enough interesting things with the character. I love the relationship with her and the crow. I thought that was very unique. I think the audience, I'm going to give it that little bump. This is fine with a capital F. I think the audience got it right. 70.
Yeah.
70 for you.
70. Okay.
All right. And I'll touch up on some of those points that you guys made that we maybe glossed over. Like, Elle Fanning is like fine in the part. I feel like almost anyone could do it in both Maleficent and the original Sleeping Beauty. Yeah. The princess is like probably the least interesting character, oddly enough, even though the story revolves around the princess.
Yeah, that's true.
And then you have then you mentioned the crow character. I kind of like how they set up the crow character and give the crow a little more of a backstory, because I did find that the crow character in the animated version kind of like an interesting,
she needs someone to talk to,
sidekick, right? Well, yeah. But like, sort of as like her top minion who is able to like do her bidding and stuff, and he has a good, interesting, sinister personality in the animated version, because all of her other minions are straight up morons apparently. But I like that they give that a little attention. That actor also brings some interesting choices to that role. But for me, it's again, just not what I would have preferred that they do. They made choices, and that's better than nothing. Definitely a higher score than all the other live action remakes that make no choices. But it's just a mixed bag, and I wind up feeling, for me, like 57% is the right number.
Okay.
So remind us, Keith, what does that percentage come out to?
I'm once again satisfied. 59. 59.
Which works.
59. Wow.
Second time in a row, we come to a 59%, a like down to the wire, fresh or rotten score. But that's where we fall yet again. And so on Maleficent, we are officially siding with the critics. So now we can move on to the sequel to Maleficent, which came out 5 years later, Maleficent, Mistress of Evil.
The borders are open, but humans are not welcome, isn't that right?
What exactly are you implying, Your Majesty?
Innocent men are being slaughtered on the moors. And she's talking about fairies.
Contain your animal, or I will.
If I didn't know better, I'd say you were making a threat.
Well, do you?
Do I what?
Know better.
So Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, that comes out 5 years after the first one. And Yeah, I had never really seen it. I kind of forgot there was a sequel, really, until Johnny, you brought it to our attention. And it's crazy. It's even more divided than the original one. Audiences love this.
Right.
95% of audiences like this movie, which is like a really high score compared to the 39% of critics. Because 39% is like a solid bad score, I would say.
Yeah.
But then, 95 is like crazy. There are like
It's like real. That not like, oh, we liked it. That's like, this movie's amazing.
that's higher than like, I don't know, like Jaws or something. Like that's,
Yeah, right.
That's
It's
crazy
true.
high. So that's the audiences really enjoyed this one. I mean, I'm like very conflicted about this sequel because I went into it not really knowing anything.
Mm-hmm.
And watching it at first, like in the first 10 minutes, I'm like, why is this, what is the point to this movie still? I'm not quite sure. And then the plot finally gets going and I'm like, okay, there's more going on in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of like that they dive more into this like mythology of what Maleficent even is and other creatures that are similar to Maleficent, other fairies with horns and bird wings. And Michelle Pfeiffer is this villain in the movie creating conflict.
Yeah.
She's
She's the Mistress of Evil. They
She is.
mistitled the whole movie. It's all Michelle Pfeiffer's queen character.
Well, that's what I was alluding to before, is that Michelle Pfeiffer, towards the end of the movie, has this thing about how she used fear to get what she wants, and she created, like, basically a smear campaign against Maleficent to turn people against her, and that's kind of what the movie's saying, like, oh, that original story we were told, say that 1959 story, that was just a ploy to turn, like, humans against magic folk and get people to be afraid of Maleficent. And so this movie is basically trying to negate the original animated story altogether.
Yeah.
And as if to say, like, that story is, that is a manipulation of another evil character. But I don't know, like, this movie's longer. It didn't feel that much longer, but I have such mixed feelings about it, because at times I'm like, I feel like I would go back to this one more than the first one. But at other times, I'm like, this is so sloppy and so ridiculous at times, especially the end. Yeah. I'm still reeling. I mean, I saw this maybe like a couple hours before we started recording, so it's still like
same.
digesting. But man, there are some like crazy choices here, and I get the more extreme. Like, what's bad is worse than what's bad in the first movie, but at the same time, there's some things that are better than the first movie. So. I'm like a divided JJ myself.
You have to decide for yourself what you like.
I'm having an inner
dislike,
debate here in my head. I don't even know what to think. But what about you, Johnny? Like, what was your initial reaction watching this?
Yeah, so believe it or not, I actually like this movie. I'll just say it right off the bat. I like it better than the first one. I think that the problems that were hamstringing the first Maleficent are gone now, because you don't have the constraints of the Sleeping Beauty story. You have built in now a further understanding of the, obviously Maleficent, but some of the other characters. And like that whole scene at the dinner with, like, you find out it's the spindle that she uses to stab the husband, and Maleficent is like forcing herself into small talk. Like, that was fun. That's like what you go to the movies for, is stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. The execution of this stuff, again, nothing that I haven't seen before, and probably better in some areas. But like, this was a version that I enjoyed the choices. I liked where they took the characters and some of the story. It was a little bit hokey in some points, with how bad Michelle Pfeiffer's character was.
Oh, yeah.
She's the queen, and she was the evil one all along. But I think, like, my guard was down a little bit more, and I just was like, okay, let me just see what this is. And strangely enough, it was made in 2019, which is, is like yesterday.
Yeah,
I realized, I totally forgot. I'm like, okay, this was like probably right before COVID. And this is when, a Disney that's now influenced by how well the Marvel movies are doing, how well some of their other animated movies are doing about, like powerful women characters.
Yeah,
and I
you're right.
wonder if they borrowed some of that sensibility
There is like a similar sense of
from
like
that.
a final battle where there's just like so much more going on. And you
Yeah.
have like two armies of people battling. That does
Right.
actually, now that you think about it, it does remind me of something from a more recent Marvel climactic battle of like
Yeah.
two large legions of like opposing sides fighting against each other in a chaotic scene. That's
Right,
true.
and-
I'm making that connection now in a way I wouldn't have if you hadn't brought that up.
Yeah, and I think I have to check the dates on this, but Alice Through the Looking Glass also came out, I think, in 2017, and that was the sequel to the live-action Alice in Wonderland, which I haven't seen that one, again, for reasons why I wasn't planning on watching the sequel to Maleficent, but I also think it dealt with kind of, Alice in like a warrior costume. They have like a big war, there's big fighting that's going on in that film. So like I just the tone is different. It's almost like going from like this is an action movie. This is not a fairy tale. This
totally
is very
is.
big on action. The whole thing with like her being a phoenix. Like now we're going into like this feels more like the backstory. Okay, this is what she is now. Okay, she was heartbroken in the first one. I get the emotions behind her decision making, but like now I actually know what she is. So she's a fairy, but she's a phoenix. She's a dark fairy. I'm like the dots were connected better in this one. I don't want to say that what could have happened in this could have happened in the first one, but there is a version where both of these movies do what they do best in one bigger cohesive story that maybe does stretch a little over 2 hours, but is well worth the ride in general. So I just off the bat, like this is a movie I definitely like it better than Maleficent. And it's something would I watch again? I don't know, but it was a fried. I myself watching this.
Before Keith starts, because I know he cannot wait
Keith's
to express his
busting right
opinion.
now. Yeah.
But I will say this: I think I get a sense that fans of the first Maleficent movie go into this movie and almost get what they want, right? I kind of think that like diving more into Maleficent, like her, like what kind of creature she is and similar creatures, and playing more with her character, like her having to be nice and go to a dinner, and like there's certain elements that I think they are catering more to what audiences liked about the first movie.
Yeah.
So I think that's like that 95% comes from like the people who really liked the first movie came back, and those are only the people who are left, and those are the people who are getting exactly what they wanted, as opposed to some people, the audience members who maybe lowered that initial score for the first movie, they didn't really come back as much. So now the sequel, you're only left with the big fans of this franchise, and that's the big score there. But Keith, give us the other side of it. I can tell that you are maybe not seeing eye to eye here.
I'm really happy the Goonies never got a sequel. You know how I said, like a couple minutes ago, how I said a lot of movies are fine at the end of the day? Well, if you look at a year, any given year, there may be fine movies, but there's even more meh. This movie's not bad. I'm probably more apathetic to this movie. I would equate this movie to like watching a parade. You see the parade coming. You see all the lights, the fireworks coming at you, all the whatevers, and then you're kind of realize like, oh, wait, there's no parade scheduled today. And before you have time to even think about the parade's already
It's a
on
rogue
them.
parade.
They turned the corner, they're gone, and you're like, I don't know, like what? This isn't a parade street. I don't know. I feel like I feel like I sleptwalked after the first like. I think it kind of was playing with some interesting ideas in the beginning that we've seen before in movies. So, but I was like, okay. But I think like a half hour in, I feel like I brainwashed. My brain is like, pay attention. I kept pausing the movie to see how fucking long it was. But I also was like, I was just asking questions about myself about like Disney sequels. Like I'm just like,
I kind of get what you're saying. I think
This movie's like a
get that
parade.
this movie is
And
like
then I
a
don't remember
sequence
it.
of all different kinds of tones that don't happen at the same time. So you like in the beginning, it's kind of almost like sitcom-ish, like Maleficent, practicing getting ready for the big dinner and things like that. And they introduce some other characters that are kind of silly. And then by the end of the movie, it's like an action film.
Yeah.
I think in the middle, there's some like conspiracy stuff going on.
It's very Marvel. It really is very Marvel in that sense.
But it's like one kind of tone at it. It's almost episodic in a way.
Okay.
They bring back certain creatures that I guess I kind of liked in the first movie, like those big tree people or something like that. But in terms of the plot itself, I mean, Michelle Pfeiffer has this really long-winded monologue that I didn't care for, where she's explaining this whole history.
I'm surprised I remember that. I was like, why is she bad again? I'm like, oh yeah, like her brother or something.
But it was like so unexplored. It's like, what brother? We don't know you had a brother. What other kingdom? Like, she goes on this speech. We don't flash back to it. We just hear her talking about it. And it's, I feel like, so half-baked what her motivations are. She just hates magical people at the end of the day.
Yeah.
There's a reason for it. And she's hell-bent on basically committing genocide against magic people. And
Yeah.
so, you know, at the end, when they're kind of giving her a comedic comeuppance, it becomes like a comedy again. Like, she falls on her face. The music becomes more playful. It's like, no. Like,
Turn into a
she's
goat.
responsible. Yeah, they turned into a goat. But, like, she is responsible for, like, hundreds of magical creatures getting killed. Maybe thousands. I don't know. But for a while, they're playing up the intensity and the tragedy of all these magical creatures being like slaughtered, and you know, her snide evil face as she watches. And then at the end, it's like, oh, she's a goat, ha ha ha, let's have a wedding right now. It's like, wait, what?
Yeah,
This ending is like insane to me. It's like, yeah, let's have a wedding right now, after this huge battle scene where tons of people have been killed. Let's have a wedding right this second. Let's not wait a day. That just like threw me for like a huge loop.
The characters strangely were like obsessed with like peace. Everything was just, let's not fight, let's do peace, let's not do all, like it's like maybe it is recalling Sleeping Beauty in that it was kind of dry, but like that was like the main motivation. And like we alluded before, for a movie called Maleficent, Mistress of Evil,
she's good.
Not all that evil.
She's not bad. She's not even bad.
She's really not evil.
She's not even
not,
bad in
goes
this movie. Like let alone
that goes
evil.
into the thesis. That goes into like the thing of the villain's plot of like, oh, like it's an ironic title if anything. Also, like it hit me at one point where there's at least like a 20-minute stretch where we don't even see Maleficent. Like, she goes to be with the other bird people, and then we go back to the kingdom.
That's it.
Whatever, like the fairies.
In the script,
like
bird people.
Like whatever they are, they're fairies, but they're specific kinds. They're different than the little fairies, the blue, red, and green ones. But like, she's with them, and then it cuts to like, you know, what's going on in the kingdom with Michelle Pfeiffer, and that goes on for a really long time. And it's like, wait a minute, what about the main character who we're here for? We almost forget about her. So it's like Michelle Pfeiffer is the Mistress of Evil, I suppose, the real one. But maybe it's like one of those kind of things where they get lost in the sauce a little bit, writing this whole kind of convoluted plot conspiracy. And it's like, oh crap, like, this is Maleficent's movie. We got to go back to her.
And this strikes me too as a film that I'm sure went through a ton of rewrites, and there's probably large chunks of the final script that are missing that might have explained some of these things a little bit better. But instead it does all feel like everybody in the orchestra playing a note at once to tune up, you know, and it's all just like, it's like, ooh, okay, like that start of that was good, but most like, can we try
all the
that
instruments
again?
on the parade? Yes, that's exactly what they're doing.
There you go.
A little more focus would have been nice. It just seems like a big mess to me. Like, everything, story-wise, character-wise, like everything just seemed like they threw tons of things into a pot and mixed it up, and like the story is a wash, basically. It's like, whatever, like, we're gonna bring back this character, we're gonna delve a little more into her mythology, that could be a little interesting, but for the most part, I'm just thrown for like a whirlwind of generic plot elements and tonal inconsistencies that really leave me feeling totally confused at the end. I don't know, I can't even say good or bad. I'm just almost at a loss for words at the end of this movie.
There are good elements to it. There's like, you know, it's well directed. It's like the costumes, the acting is fine. I was thinking like, there's a bunch of points, like, it's the Maleficent movie that I want I'm not losing sleep over it. I most likely will not get, or the Maleficent sequel, especially especially under the Disney umbrella. You're gonna get a very safe, risk-averse, what works in our company, Marvel-esque, like a complete CGI fire. Like you could tell me all these actors died and we brought them back CGI'd, and this was all green screen. And there was something I'm like, if I were a Disney CEO, there were like in 2019 alone, there were double-digit feature films, let alone all the stuff that premiered on Disney Plus and all even counting like the Penguins, like the National Geographic stuff. But there were at least like between Marvel, Star Wars, Pixar, Disney like there were at least double-digit features. Lessen the budget on this. Allow them to like. I'm not saying go like, once again, I'm not saying go to Vegas. You could take a risk, and I would respect a risk of it failing. I'd rather hate this movie than find it meh. Like, because it's just, I did not, once again, I'm trying to care about Elle Fanning, or like, she's a great actress, but I'm trying to care about Aurora, and it's just like I'm trying to care about Warwick Davis.
I find myself being annoyed with the Aurora character in this movie, if anything, because it basically seems like everything she does plays into the hands of the villain of the movie. It's kind of like she is a hindrance throughout the whole movie. She was like a non-factor in the first movie, and in this movie, she's just playing into the hands of the villain. And so, it's another time where the story, like, they're trying to incorporate her as best as she can, but
she's a bigger star. Give her more screen time.
I almost felt like the start of this is still all around Sleeping Beauty, but she is probably like the least interesting factor in the whole saga, I guess, which is too bad because she has the most potential, especially given how she was like a blank slate in the original animated version, to really kind of give more agency.
You're also kind of constrained.
She's still a character. She's still a character that things are happening to.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yes.
Instead of a character who maybe takes control of her own fairy tale, and there's a loss of potential there.
Like Johnny, you mentioned before, like you kind of like that. Like, I feel like when you're dealing with something like Beauty and the Beast, Maleficent, you're dealing only in fairy tales and castles. That's the world that we live in. The next bad guy is a wicked queen. I just would have this was a chance to really explore Maleficent as a character. And of course, the one time you get backstory, I'm not interested at all. Like, that's where it kind of ruined the mystery of her. Like, I'd rather see her character going forward as opposed to looking backward on this.
Well, why does the character? Did they ever explain why her character has never met another similar creature to herself? Like, it seems like she was totally unaware that there's a whole race of people just like her.
Yeah.
They were right next door.
They were right there.
Yeah, I don't think that was actually ever explained. And that whole scene, I thought that was something I was into that backstory, Keith. Like, that was cool. She like wakes up in this like nest kind of place. There's like a cavernous like world that is like, I guess, is underground in the sky. Like, I don't know. I don't know those things, but it didn't bother me.
I liked it in Kung Fu Panda 3. Like, I've seen it before. No, I'm serious. No, but I've seen a lot of these aspects before. And
you know what I honestly thought of, Keith? Sorry to interrupt you, but it's funny enough, and I'm being dead serious. I think of Shrek Forever After. That's kind of the vibe I got, which was that little bit like medieval, and Shrek like meets the other ogres. That is kind of the vibe I got.
Frozen 2. Which came out in 2019. Like, it's been done, and I just would have had her like do something that would have been considered evil, like cross the threshold, like at least like the point of no return. Though, like where it's kind of like where I wanted Rey to join up with Kylo Ren at the end of Last Jedi. But I think you're only constrained like. I know I'm not going to get that, but I'm just like, with 12 feature films, lessen the budget, maybe add some practical effects. You could really
take a risk.
Something to
take a
risk.
risk.
Take a risk. Take the loss. You're going to make money on it.
Of all companies that are able to withstand a risk and a financial failure, it would be Disney. And you're right. It seems like they're just recycling a lot of plot elements from previous successful movies, and that's too bad. But again, we're not going to see her do that big thing that is evil, Mistress of Evil, because they are decidedly having that whole evil stigma be a falsehood. That is the ultimate decision of this movie, is that she never was evil really to begin with. And that's another kind of wasted potential. Like, let's see her make that decision. Like, if she truly is both good and bad, like, let's see her really struggle with that dichotomy and, you know, have, like, some really interesting moments where, like, you see both sides of her and having hard times making decisions. But no, she was always good, and she's just kind of fighting a bad rap.
Yeah. I think that's such a, even though I did enjoy this film, that is such a valid point from both of you that there's no way Maleficent is not even the most evil character in her own 2 films, I feel like. And she most clearly is in Sleeping Beauty. And it's because Disney nowadays, you know, for some reason they think like the bottom's going to fall out, like they're going to lose a ton of money, right? But they've had string after hit. They need to start. This would have been a movie that would have benefited even better from risks, and allowing, like I mentioned before, about like a Jokerizing of the character, where you really go. You don't have to go like too dark, but you really can, in a family friendly way, explore some of the deeper. You know, there's like no nuance to her either. There's nothing that makes her tick. There's nothing that really makes her upset aside from just like her own life being threatened. Which, how uninteresting is that? I mean, we all we all fall under that too. They need to take there's
nothing particular to her character that's threatening. It's all like the threat that any other character could face in any other story.
Right.
It
doesn't do good, sir.
I had this whole feeling too, in addition to like recycled plot elements, that a lot of this movie either received notes or was conceived with like, you know, executive focus groups or stuff. Like, just as an example, the addition of that like Sonic Hedgehog ripoff character, like that CGI hedgehog character.
Oh, Pinto.
They introduced this character in the beginning, and I feel like, is he going to be the comic relief? What is he? They just have random shots of him looking cute at the camera and reacting to stuff. And I'm like, this is just a character that someone conceived to just appeal to young children, basically. Like a would-be mascot of the film that you would make toys out of. And it's like, this is like the most transparently useless, uninspired character that I cringe every time I see him on the screen. And it's just indicative of a lot of the other creative choices that they made in this sequel. It was like, just you know, keep cranking the, you know, keep turning the same familiar wheel over and over again.
I know I would get fired as like a Disney executive, but the first Maleficent it was the 4th highest grossing movie of 2014. So, and you know, same thing with Alice in Wonderland, made $1 billion.
Insane.
It's okay to keep it at 1, and I would get thrown out of the building because like this movie almost feels like it's going to get forgotten. I mean, in 2019 alone, you had Endgame, Rise of Skywalker, and Toy Story 4. It's like it was so generic that it doesn't even stand out, and it will like it was kind of the forgotten gravestone. You know, it's in that forgotten area of Disney. Like,
probably the least memorable release of all the ones you just mentioned that they had in 2019. And actually, it's interesting that Toy Story 4, you mentioned that also being released in 2019. That is such an interesting difference in a sequel that had a purpose, that had original ideas, that took risks, and didn't do things that forward. That didn't do things that pandered to audiences. Did things like character growth that was consistent with the previous installments. And there was a real reason to make that movie. Like, they didn't just make a Toy Story 4 because they knew it would make money, because any Toy Story movie would. But they like waited for the right script, and then there you go. As opposed to this movie where it's like just it's like the opposite reason. Basically, it's like the antithesis. So I think there could be a good Maleficent idea out there somewhere, and if they needed more time, if it was going to come out 10 years after the first one, if it was finally a good idea to do it, then that's fine. No one's like demanding you make a Maleficent movie right now.
We're basically writing the first movie. You got people sympathize with Maleficent. We are on her side. We get her viewpoint. The second movie should have been, I don't know if I'm still on her side. Like, she has to make some very compromising positions to maybe protect her kingdom against. I'm okay with Michelle Pfeiffer. I'm okay she's having this second win as an actress and popping up and stuff again. But it should have been to challenge how, like, the audience's empathy or sympathy for this character who maybe not even gets a kick out of doing evil stuff, but is just like, I have to do this stuff for the name of my kingdom, and maybe like I don't talk to Aurora again.
Right, or like just because it's again in her nature that she has both those good and evil parts, because like that alone, she makes some decisions that are you can't go that are irreversible, something like that. But yeah, I don't know. I just wasn't sure what they were trying to accomplish in this movie, besides obviously to make more money.
Yes? Will you give me away?
Never.
Will you walk me down the aisle?
Yes.
No, I completely agree. A lot of these films too, and I hate to say it, is like, the baseline caring is like, okay, she has a bunch of bird people that their home world is at stake. Do I really care about these people at the conclusion of 2 hours either way? Not really. I'm not an evil guy. I don't want to see people suffer or anything like that. But like, at no point during that battle sequence was I like, oh, come on, guys, don't lose the battle. You already know what's going on, and the stakes just aren't completely high. And much more, and this could be, truthfully, I mean, we're older audiences. The movies that we watch are obviously more than what a family audience would watch, so we're more in tune to what a good psychological cognitive dissonance would do for a character like this, and maybe that's more of what we want. But a lot of these films, I really just don't care enough. And like,
there's no investment. Right. I'm not invested like I should be. I think that could be a seed of an idea that'd be interesting. Like, oh, Maleficent comes from like a race of people who are hiding, and now she can maybe like champion them to come out. There's something of an interesting idea there that goes totally unexplored. And
or what if they're evil? What if they're evil?
Sure,
she has to choose between her past and her future.
Right.
Yeah.
God damn it, Disney! Listen to us. Like this, we got Maleficent 3 on our hands.
But and then by the end of the movie too, like these people, these fairy people, have lost like maybe half their numbers in this battle. Like, they're absolutely decimated, and yet they are still at the end of this movie going like, "Woo, a wedding! Yeah, let's do it." It's like half of your like friends and family were just murdered. Like, there's just no.
You guys need a minute?
Like, yeah. It's like I don't even know if the movie wants me to care at that point.
Yeah.
Like, that's coming from just a confusing choice of tones.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, even I have to say too, like there are even moments in the first movie where it's like suspense, intensity, like this is the moment, the most dramatic moment, and I'm just like, I don't really care or invested really as much as they want me to be, which is probably like the most, that's the bare minimum, right? So like a movie or not is to care what happens. So I think we can. Then sum up on our on the sequel here. So what were your summary and score for Mistress of Evil, John?
Okay, the aptly titled Mistress of Evil. By the way, biggest sin in the movie was showing Michelle Pfeiffer's hand like within the first 20 minutes. They should have never done that, because I probably would have been surprised with the needle and stuff. I love when she goes in the dungeon and watches everybody. It would have been cool to see that, but just not knowing that she was behind it, because when she Keith is doing the motion, that stuff like that, choices like that made this movie cool and better than the first one. Is like, to get to the dungeon, she literally has the mannequin and it's breaking someone's neck, to go in.
There's some interest from a production and design standpoint. There were some cool things that we saw for sure.
And I also liked when they invite him to the wedding and the one woman's playing the piano and like certain notes are like putting out that, like, I guess it turns like the magic into non-magic, like the tree turns into a tree.
Or the fairies turn to flowers.
Yeah.
Like, it was really unclear.
Right.
That was kind of confusing.
But it was a cool concept. So nonetheless, like this movie stand out better to me than the first one, and I do like it. Just was a more fun film. It didn't take itself too seriously, which is both a good and a bad thing. But all in all, this was more of the movie I was expecting with the first one, and I would much rather go back to this world than the very first one, which felt like it was stuck in its own muck there to try to paint over the Sleeping Beauty story. So I am gonna give it a fresh rating, just barely though. I'm gonna give it about a 63.
Okay, 63. I mean, that's kind of like right in between the audience and critical score
Yeah.
there too.
Just better, not much better than First Maleficent, clearly better, and I will award it that. But yeah, 95 is astronomically high, and 39 I think is a little too harsh for what the movie's trying to be.
Okay, so so what was it again?
63.
63. Okay, and then Keith, I imagine, is much lower.
I know. I feel like I mean, these are divided films. Like,
That's the name of the podcast. He said it. Woo, yeah.
Dude, maybe it was my fault or not. I watched this movie with my eyes glazed, with my eyes glazed over.
Say with your
just
eyes
like,
closed. It
I
was all
know
audio.
I'm gonna.
Well, of course you didn't like it if your eyes were closed. You didn't give it a fair
I know
shot.
I'm gonna have to remind myself if this movie ever comes up in a discussion. I'm gonna have to remind myself that yes, I did see it, and I'm going to wager that there has to be some people in the audience who feel the same way. Once again, I like the parade, and then the parade goes, and then I go wait a minute, that was a parade of rats. I didn't really think of the parade of I didn't really think about the logistics of the parade.
Maleficent.
The parade's
colon.
done.
It was just a parade.
It was just a parade. Now let's go home and
Pointless
eat couscous. Well made, well acted. Or everyone looked like they had a good time.
Real quick, Keith, that is just baseline at this point for Disney.
Yeah, baseline.
They have a lot of money. They could get whatever talent they want. It looks good. It's acted fairly well enough. That's not the bar anymore. That is the absolute lowest thing. So I agree.
If they have a lot of money.
Yeah.
This movie a movie like this could benefit from more practical effects than the entire green screen. That whole stuff, it was just oh my god. 42. I feel like I'm not gonna remember this movie.
Okay.
And I usually don't like the only good. If a movie's good, then it stops being was this movie unnecessary? I actually think this movie was kind of unnecessary, but first movie made money. I get it.
Yeah, it's funny too because when you say obviously Disney at the very least we know will get the good production value and the good acting. I mean that's at this point that's like saying you go to a restaurant, you're at least gonna get a glass of water poured for you.
Yeah,
and
really.
Have a plate with utensils and stuff that's that's the least you can do. It comes down to writing for both cases of these movies, right? No matter what you do, if the screenplay just isn't there, it's not. And this screenplay was a mess for me. I do agree that there was a lot more going on. So if I had to go back to either film, I might go back to the second one because it was more interesting than the first one. I think the first one dragged a lot. I don't know if this one dragged. It was just disjointed in each act. But even though I'm probably gonna give this a lower score, I think I'm gonna give this I'll give this a 48%.
Wow. Okay.
Just even though that is a good 9% lower than the first film, I don't even know if it's fair to say if this is for me better or worse. Just on its own, it's two separate entities at this point. You have a movie that's trying to reinvent a story, and then you have a sequel that's able to do its own thing, right? And to me, I don't know if I can really say one's better or worse than the other ones. Or they're just, they're each their own entity at that point. So what's our percentage score, average score for the Mistress of Evil?
A 51.
Okay. So a dip there, an 8% dip from the original movie. But either way, we are still
We are
siding.
firmly 55 on this
Yeah,
franchise.
We are still siding with the critics on the Mistress of Evil. Yeah, I think this movie maybe just will go on to have its very specific fans who will like advocate for the franchise. They came back for the sequel, and if they get a third one, good for them.
Yeah.
If they want to go back to these movies, they'll enjoy it.
We'll be
It'll
back.
It'll be divided, of course. Listen, this was
Yes.
this is the alternate ending they should work with. Instead of turning Michelle Pfeiffer into a goat, Maleficent should wave her hands. However her magic works, we still not even sure. They never explained that either. Wave her hand and make Michelle Pfeiffer watch Grease 2 front to back, and then critique her performance.
Michelle Pfeiffer should have turned herself into a goat. I really don't know why. Hey, it backfired. I really like that. That was the most bad, evil thing that Maleficent did that entire movie.
Right.
Yeah, that was, I don't even. I think like the villain. You can just say the villain was Michelle Pfeiffer because she's such a villain in like most things she does, right?
Yeah.
All right, so thank you, Johnny, for joining us for this first ever double feature of Divided Films. It was great having you back
Yeah,
again.
thank you, man.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
Yeah, and through all we had some technical difficulties along the way, but we made it work. We thought we were cursed. We thought maybe Maleficent cursed us, but we were able to overcome the curse and vanquish her once and for all.
Awesome.
So thanks, guys, for listening as always, and keep an eye out for more Divided Films coming soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.